Welcome to Sabbath School, brought to you by It Is Written. I'm Eric Flickinger, your host, and we are beginning a brand new quarter, a brand new 13 weeks. And this quarter, we are going to be digging into the book of Hebrews. The title of this quarter's Adult Sabbath School Bible Study Guide is In These Last Days, the Message of Hebrews. And with us this week and for the next 13 weeks is the author of the Adult Bible Study Guide, and that is Dr. Felix Cortez. He is the Associate Professor of New Testament Literature at Andrews University. Dr. Cortez, welcome.
Thank you very much, Eric, for having me here.
It's great to have you. Now, the book of Hebrews, you're well familiar with New Testament literature, of which Hebrews is a big part. And why is the book of Hebrews so significant? Let's start with the title of this quarter's lesson, and that is In These Last Days, the Message of Hebrews. Why is this book so important for us to understand today?
Eric, that is an excellent question. Hebrews has always have an important place for Adventists because Hebrews talks about the ministry of Jesus, the priestly ministry of Jesus in the heavenly sanctuary in our behalf. Jesus ascended to heaven to be in the presence of God to secure our salvation. We Adventists believe that the message of the sanctuary is very important. And I think that no other book in the New Testament talks about the ministry of Jesus in the heavenly sanctuary with such clarity as Hebrews does. The other book that talks about Jesus' ministry is also the book of Revelation. So Hebrews is really an interesting book. It is an interesting book for several reasons. It has a great Christology. It talks about Jesus as our Savior, the captain of our salvation, as a high priest. It has a beautiful description of who Jesus is and what he does for us. Hebrews is also very important for us because it has a new covenant, which is very important. But you asked me also an important question. Why the title In These Last Days? I got this title from the second verse in chapter 1. In these last days, God has spoken to us through the Son or in the Son. Of course, the author of Hebrews, who I believe it was Paul, believed that Jesus was coming soon. And we are still here. But there is a very interesting thing that we sometimes forget about the historical background of Hebrews, is that if Hebrews was written for Jewish believers in Jerusalem, which is probably what happened, Paul wrote this letter around the first 2 years in the AD 60s. Which means, Eric, that the letter was written just 8 years before the end of the sanctuary, the earthly sanctuary, the end of the destruction of Jerusalem, which was, in fact, for the Jewish nation, the end of time. In fact, for Jesus, the fall of Jerusalem is really a type, a prefiguration, a experience of what the end is going to be like. So Hebrews was written for a group of people that, even though they didn't know that, they were living in the last 8 years of their life as they knew it, right? They didn't die, of course, in the fall of Jerusalem, but life changed completely for them. Now, we don't know when Jesus is going to come. But it may be possible that for you and for me, Jesus may come sooner. We don't have life but. So for us, we need to live always as if Jesus is coming right away. So Hebrews talks about this important message, what we need to do right to be ready to meet Jesus when he comes for us.
And I think you make an interesting point in this week's lesson about what this message, this book of Hebrews really is. And it's essentially a sermon that Paul is sharing with these people who need to know what's going on, who need to know what's important in these last days of what they were familiar with life. And we need to know that too. Why this sermon format, if you will? We see a lot of letters to other groups of people, but this book is kind of unique. Bring that out a little bit. What are some of the unique portions of that?
Well, chapter 13, verse 22 refers to Hebrews as a word of exhortation. And the expression word of exhortation in New Testament times referred to the sermon in the synagogue. When Paul and Barnabas were in, if I remember correctly, Lystra, Acts chapter 13, tells us that they attended the synagogue service. And when the time came for the sermon, the leader of the synagogue asked them, "Dear brothers, do you have any word of exhortation?" Meaning, do you have a sermon to preach? And Paul and Barnabas says, "Of course, we have a sermon." Now, this is very interesting, Eric, because Hebrews may be possibly the only sermon as we have from the time of the apostles. It's a real sermon. And if you read with care the book of Hebrews, you're going to find that Hebrews does not refer to the audience as readers. He refers to them as hearers. He constantly refers to God speaking to them, God saying things to them, and we needing to hear. And the other thing is that Hebrews is rhetorically beautiful, just as sermons should be. Well spoken, well structured, beautifully arranged. Hebrews has probably one of the best Greek readings that we have in the New Testament. Some people would say that is the best Greek that we have in the New Testament. Not only because it is difficult, but because it has beautiful constructions. Hebrews 1:1-4, for example, the introduction to this sermon is called a periodos. That is the rhetorical term in the New Testament time to refer to a beautiful, carefully crafted sentence, a long sentence, to introduce a speech. And Hebrews 1:1-4 is one of the best crafted sentences that we have in the New Testament. So Hebrews is a beautiful piece of literature. But not only that, Hebrews is not interested simply in providing us with theological information. Hebrews has a lot of very deep theology. But the main point of Hebrews is to move us to action. He wants us to exhort, to hold fast to Jesus, to hold fast to the confession, to fix our eyes upon Jesus. So the author of Hebrews is trying to move the audience from a position of probably they are a little bit tired of their Christian existence, now to become engaged, strongly attached, strongly advocating and living for Jesus. So basically, Hebrews moves us to action. It's a call to action. It's an exhortation.
And of course, that's something that we absolutely need today. We look at the world around us and we see the obvious need of a positive Christian influence in that world. And as we're surrounded by worldliness, it can sometimes be a little bit oppressive. Sometimes it seems like we're fighting a losing battle. Sometimes it makes us feel like, are we really going to finally get there? And really the audience of the book of Hebrews, they were facing a similar struggle. They were up against a world that really wasn't in line with God's will. And so they had this challenge that they faced, this struggle. And really on Monday, you start kind of digging into that struggle that they're going through. How does that struggle parallel the struggle that we're facing today?
Eric, you bring out an important aspect of the lesson is the experience of the audience. The author knows the audience very, very well. He knows their history. And that's why the sermon is so effective, because he's able to address the specific needs they have. Now, the story of the audience is an interesting story because it's very similar to many of our stories. You see, the audience had gone through several stages, and probably we will examine every one of them. They went first through the beginning of their Christian experience. And Hebrews describes this beginning of their Christian experience as a wonderful beginning, full of miracles, full of wonderful testimony by God through wonderful, powerful acts of salvation for them. And also distribution of the Holy Spirit gifts to them. So the beginning of their Christian experience is really a wonderful beginning. And we can talk about that probably in a little moment. Then comes a second stage. Once you begin with strength, your life for Jesus, very often for believers, they begin to face the wrath of the dragon. We begin to experience persecution. We begin to experience rejection. We begin to experience the world around us beginning to feel that we are now different and that we are not what we used to be. And family members begin to look at us differently. Friends, we lose friendships. And they begin to have this problem. Some of them were persecuted actively. Some of them were put in jail. Many of them lost their property. So they are now, some of them in jail. Now they are poor. They don't have the friends that they used to have. And there comes a third stage, what I will call weariness. They're weary. They're tired, Jesus hasn't come. I believed in him. I had a beautiful beginning of my experience in the past. I experienced all these wonderful things. What happened? Where did God go? And why am I suffering these losses? And this is what happened with the audience of Hebrews. They are experiencing a big loss. They are being chained by the people around them. And it is at that moment that the author writes to them and tells them, we are living in the end of time, and they were. And we need to hold fast to Jesus. We need to love one another, and we need to exhort one another. We need to help one another. And we need to, strengthen the weak knees, strengthen the drooping hands. We need to make straight paths for our feet. We need to run straight. For the author of Hebrews, Christian life is not a dash. How do you call these runs in the Olympic Games, which is 100 meters? Yes, a sprint, a dash, right? A dash run. It's not like that. For the author of Hebrews, the Christian life is really a marathon. And you're not fast. You need to endure. Yeah.
That's right. We're going to be looking at that lifelong race that the author of Hebrews talks about when we come back in just a moment. But I want to encourage you, if you want to pick up the supplement to the Adult Bible Study Guide, that is the extra book that we have with additional information on the book of Hebrews, you want to stop by the It Is Written bookstore. That's itiswritten.shop. And you can pick up the companion volume to this quarter's Adult Bible Study Guide on the book of Hebrews. And we're going to come back in just a moment and continue digging into the experience of the audience in the book of Hebrews. We'll be right back.
Thank you for remembering that It Is Written exists because of the kindness of people just like you. To support this international life-changing ministry, please call us now at 800-253-3000. You can send your tax-deductible gift to the address on your screen, or you can visit us online at itiswritten.com. Thank you for your prayers and for your financial support. Our number again is 800-253-3000, or you can visit us online at itiswritten.com.
Welcome back to Sabbath School, brought to you by It Is Written. We're looking at the book of Hebrews, and we're digging into the experience of not so much the readers, but the listeners, because the book of Hebrews is very much a sermon, as we just learned. Let's come back to Sunday's lesson about a glorious beginning. Dr. Cortez, you mentioned that the Christian's experience is often, it has a glorious beginning. Let's bring a little bit more out there.
Thank you, Eric. This is one of the sections of the lesson that I like the most. I especially refer to what Hebrews 2 verses 3 and 4 say. Verses 3 and 4 says, "How shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord, and was confirmed to us by those who heard him?" And then verse 4 says, "God also bearing witness, both with signs and wonders, with various miracles and gifts of the Holy Spirit, according to his own will." What the author is doing here is describing what happened at the beginning of their Christian experience. The author uses this expression, signs and wonders. And this expression is used, Eric, in the book Acts of the Apostle, to talk about these signs and wonders that the apostles performed in Jerusalem and beyond Jerusalem, Samaria, Caesarea, and other places. This expression, signs and wonders, also looks back to the experience of Moses and the people of Israel in being delivered from Egypt. What God is doing here is that God brought the message of salvation through Jesus, and then he attested to this salvation by acts, by realities, by objective evidences that God is powerful and that he wants to save us. What did the people, the audience of the Hebrews experience? Probably they experienced some miraculous healings. It is possible that some of them may have spoken in tongues. It is possible that there were prophets in their midst. That is what happened in the book of Acts. You know, several years ago, in the devotion that we had every night at home, we used to read a series of books about missionaries at our home. Okay, we used to read that, and one thing that caught my attention is very interesting is that when missionaries reach new lands, new places, very often God attests to the truth and the reality of the message of the missionaries, especially in non-Christian lands. God attests to their message by miracles, by wonderful deeds of power. And I think this is what is happening here. If you go to Jerusalem, it begins with these attestations. Then you go to Samaria, and you find that the same thing happens in Samaria. God witnesses to the power of the gospel in Samaria with wonderful acts. You go to Caesarea, people who speak in tongues in Caesarea. And then you go to Ephesus. Paul overturned that city because of the powerful evidences God gave to the reality and to the truth of Paul's message. And the same happens with Corinth. You have 1 Corinthians 12 to 14. You have all these spiritual gifts that are given to believers. God attesting the reality, the truth of the message. And that is what the believers experience. Their past experience was really amazing. And I have noticed, Eric, I have been a pastor also of several churches. That is sometimes the same story of our churches. Many of our churches have a glorious beginning. They began with a wonderful growth, a wonderful communion, relationships in the church, beautiful experiences, great conversion stories, amazing evangelistic series. But sometimes what happened to the readers of Hebrews happens in our churches as well, that this stage does not last forever sometimes.
That next stage that you're referring to here, and you delve into it on Monday's lesson, is that struggle. There's a few verses here that you quote in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 32 through 34. It says here, "But recall the former days in which after you were illuminated, you endured a great struggle with sufferings, partly while you were made a spectacle both by reproaches and tribulations, and partly while you became companions of those who were so treated. For you had compassion on me in my chains, and joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods, knowing that you have a better and an enduring possession for yourselves in heaven." So after this glorious beginning, it seems very commonplace for many Christians to hit this struggle. And that's exactly what they did.
Yes. And what is this struggle? There was a problem with shame. People was shamed. They were publicly exposed to ridicule. Some of them were put in jail. And if you're put in jail, your property is plundered. And so they were going through a difficult time. Now, the interesting thing, Eric, is that Paul does something important when he says, you experience this struggle. But the word for struggle is athlesin. That is the Greek word for struggle, athlesin, which means really, is the same word from athletics. Athletics comes. So the author Paul is saying, you're not simply struggling. You are in a contest. You are in a sports event. Basically, what Paul is saying to them, you are not victims. You are like sportsmen. You are like athletes. You're suffering because you have a goal. You have a prize. You're going there. And I think this is what we need to have in mind. When we struggle in our Christian life because of our following Jesus, and when we are shamed or we are being ostracized a little bit, or we lose friendships, or we lose a job, right? Because of our faithfulness to Jesus. I know this doesn't happen too much in the US because there are guarantees here in the US, but in other places people lose their jobs because of faithfulness. When that happens, the Apostle Paul wants to remember, you are not a victim. You are participating in a contest. You are participating in a marathon because you are going to get to the goal. You're going to receive the reward, and the reward is worth it. It's worth all the trouble you can go through it. Don't look at the struggle. Look at the goal. And look at Jesus. Look at how he ran. And then in Hebrews 12:2, uses a very interesting Greek language to say that Jesus despised shame. That is to say, Jesus shamed shame. He says, shame is not the important thing for me. What important for me is what God thinks of me, not what everyone around me thinks of me. What matters is God. So when we go through these experiences, we need to remember those words.
I think that's powerful, that the struggles that we go through as Christians aren't aimless, purposeless struggles, but we have a goal which is attainable, not by our own selves, of course, but as Christ helps us through these struggles, these goals are very much attainable. You do delve into a concept here on Tuesday's lesson, though, of this next stage, and that is this malaise. We don't have a lot of time to dig into this, but why is this an important stage for us to understand?
Well, that was the stage in which the readers of Hebrews were. They stopped growing in their Christian life. If you go to Hebrews 5:11 and following, says you're okay with milk. You are not going for the food that is for adults, stronger food. You need to grow in your understanding of Jesus. And then you go to Hebrews 10:25. They have stopped attending meetings. But what happens more dangerously is what happened in Hebrews 3:12, where it says that there is this heart of unbelief that is growing on. This is this heart of, is it true that God's promises can be trusted? These doubts, this weariness is happening to them. And if you go to Hebrews 12, verse 15, it says something very interesting there. looking carefully, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. Eric, the danger of the root of bitterness. You see, when you stop understanding that you are an athlete, that you have a goal, that there is a reason why you are suffering. When you forget that Satan is against you and you're suffering because of your faithfulness, and then you become a victim, then what happens is this root of bitterness begins to spring up in the heart. And when that happens, that is a very dangerous development, because that spreads in our life, but spreads those around us. It doesn't affect only me. It affects my spouse. It affects my children. In fact, it affects my fellow believers. This root of bitterness is the wariness that is happening with believers, and we need to watch out for that.
I don't want to skip over Thursday's message. Thursday's lesson is called These Last Days. So clearly, the book of Hebrews applies to us living in these last days. In the few seconds we have left, how does that all come together?
Yes, it is a very important section, because we, like the audience of Hebrews, have similar problems to them. Hebrews 10:35 says that the one who is coming will come very shortly. And we need to be those who press forward and inherit the promises. We, as Adventist believers, have begun to preach about Jesus' second coming for many years. But we need to continue to keep those promises in our minds and in our hearts, because that is the essence of our identity, of who we are, why we are here. So we need to keep Jesus in our minds and press together, just as Paul advised the audience of Hebrews to do.
Amen. Thank you very much, Dr. Cortez, for being with us this week. Of course, we are going to have Dr. Cortez back again next week, and we invite you to join us again next week as we continue our study of the book of Hebrews, a message for God's people living in the last days. We look forward to seeing you then.